He wasn't supposed to be home until the weekend. The flight landed early, the city still pale with morning light, and for the first time in weeks, the billionaire felt unburdened. No meetings, no calls, just the quiet satisfaction of coming home before anyone expected him. He carried a small bouquet in one hand, nothing extravagant, just something thoughtful, something for his mother. He didn't alert the house. Surprises, he believed, were better when they were simple. The mansion greeted him with stillness, too much stillness. The polished floors reflected the light from the tall windows, the grand staircase standing like a monument to order and control. This house was always calm, always predictable. Today, it wasn't. Before you begin, please take a moment to relax and enjoy the story. If you find it engaging, do me a small favor. Subscribe, like, and share to support the channel. I'd also love to hear from you, so feel free to comment and tell me where you're watching from. Your support means a lot and helps grow our community. As he stepped inside, a sharp sound cut through the silence. A voice, tight, irritated, unfamiliar in its cruelty. Then another sound beneath it, softer, unsteady. He slowed. The farther he walked, the clearer it became. Words clipped with anger, accusations spoken without mercy. He set the flowers down on a marble table, his grip tightening as instinct took over. He reached the edge of the room and stopped. His mother stood unbalanced, her cane angled awkwardly, her body turned defensively. In front of her, his fiancé, perfectly dressed, heel lifted, posture rigid with impatience. The moment stretched. Then the heel came down, not hard enough to knock her over, just enough to remind her of her place. The world narrowed to a single frame, and in that frozen second, everything he believed about love, safety, and the woman he planned to marry collapsed at once. The flight landed earlier than scheduled, the wheels touching the runway while the sky was still undecided between night and morning. From the window, the city looked softened by distance, quiet, almost forgiving. For once, there was no tightness in his chest, no countdown to the next obligation. The deal had closed cleanly, faster than expected, and with it came something unfamiliar, room to breathe. He hadn't told anyone he was coming home. The decision felt small, almost childish, but he liked it. A surprise without cameras, without assistants scrambling ahead of him. Just a quiet return. Just family. As the car pulled away from the private terminal, he allowed himself to imagine it. His fiancée's startled laugh when she saw him standing there unannounced. His mother's eyes lighting up in that gentle way she always tried to hide. The thought warmed him more than the tailored coat draped over his shoulders. At a florist near the airport, he asked for something simple. Nothing extravagant, no display meant to impress. The woman wrapped the flowers carefully, and as he took them, he thought of his mother's hands, how they always lingered over small details, how she appreciated effort more than cost. He pictured handing them to her in the kitchen, her scolding him lightly for wasting money, her smile giving her away. The iron gates of the mansion opened as they always did, smooth and silent. The house rose ahead of him, pale against the early light, every window dark, every line precise. It had taken years to build, years of decisions and negotiations, of sacrifices made quietly and justified later. Standing there now, he felt a rare sense of satisfaction, not pride exactly, but relief. This place was meant to be safe, meant to be home. Inside, the air was cool and still. He stepped onto the marble floor, the sound of his shoes echoing softly through the vastness. The familiar scent of polished stone and fresh flowers greeted him. Everything was exactly as it should be. Too exactly. He paused, listening. No footsteps, no voices. The house seemed to be holding its breath. He told himself it was nothing. It was early. His fiancée liked to sleep in when she could. His mother often stayed upstairs in the mornings, reading by the window with a cup of tea.
He imagined joining her there later, sitting longer than usual, pretending he wasn't needed anywhere else. The thought made him smile. He loosened his tie as he walked deeper into the house, letting the stiffness of travel fall away. In the foyer, the grand staircase curved upward, elegant and familiar. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, catching dust motes in the air, turning them briefly into something almost beautiful. He set his briefcase down near the door, a small act of defiance against the habits that ruled his life. For a moment, everything felt right. He moved toward the living areas, already rehearsing what he would say. Nothing important, just enough. I finished early. I missed you. I wanted to come home. Simple words, but ones he didn't say often enough. As he walked, he thought about how long it had been since he'd arrived without an agenda, how many times he'd promised himself he'd slow down once the next deal was done, once the next milestone was reached. There was always a reason to wait, always something more urgent than now. Not today, he decided. Today was just for being present. He imagined sitting at the breakfast table with his mother, listening as she told him stories he already knew, stories she repeated because they mattered to her. He imagined his fiancée joining them, teasing him for showing up unannounced, asking how long he planned to stay this time. In his mind, it was easy, warm, ordinary. He didn't notice when his steps slowed. He didn't notice the way his shoulders tensed, or how his grip tightened around the flowers. He was too busy holding on to the version of the morning he wanted, the version where coming home early meant comfort, not complication. He took a breath, steadying himself before turning the corner, ready to announce his presence, ready to be seen. He had no idea that this quiet, hopeful return, the simplest decision he'd made in months, was about to redraw every line he thought he understood about his life, his home, and the people he trusted most.
The silence settled around him in a way that felt unnatural, as if the house had been emptied of something essential. It wasn't the peaceful quiet he was used to in the early mornings, when the staff moved softly and his mother's favorite music drifted faintly from another room. This was different, heavy, expectant. He paused near the center of the hall, listening. The air felt cooler than it should have, carrying no hint of breakfast or fresh tea, no gentle sounds of life easing into the day. The mansion, usually so precise in its rhythms, felt misaligned, like a clock that had skipped a beat. He told himself again that it was nothing, that he was imagining tension where there was none. Still, he didn't call out. His instincts urged him to stay quiet, to observe before announcing himself. Years in business had trained him to notice when something didn't add up, when a room felt hostile, even before a word was spoken. He had learned to trust that sensation, the tightening at the base of his neck, the subtle awareness that came before bad news. He took another step forward. The echo of his shoes seemed louder now, too sharp against the polished floor. He slowed unconsciously, adjusting his pace to the mood of the house, as if it might react to him. His eyes moved to small details he usually overlooked, the way a door stood slightly ajar, the angle of a chair that should have been neatly aligned. Signs of disturbance so minor they could be dismissed, yet together they formed a pattern he didn't like. He passed the sitting room, where his mother often spent her mornings. The curtains were open, sunlight pouring in, but the space was empty. Her blanket was folded over the back of the chair, untouched. The teacup she favored was missing from its place. A faint unease crept deeper into his chest. Where is she? The question formed quietly, without panic, but it lingered. He moved farther into the house, his steps measured now. The flowers brushed lightly against his leg, a soft reminder of why he was there, of the moment he had imagined. He held on to that image, even as the warmth it brought began to thin. Then he heard it. Not words at first, just a sound, tight, sharp, edged with irritation.
A voice raised enough to cut through the stillness, low enough to suggest it wasn't meant to be overheard. He stopped again, every sense alert. The voice came again, clearer this time. He recognized it. His fiancée's tone had always been confident, controlled, the kind of voice that commanded attention in a room. But this version of it was different, stripped of charm, hardened by impatience. It carried an edge he had never heard directed inward, never imagined turned toward someone who couldn't push back. He didn't move. Another sound followed beneath it, softer and uneven, like words struggling to form. It reached him faintly, more feeling than language. His stomach tightened, the flowers slipped slightly in his hand, and he adjusted his grip, suddenly aware of how out of place they felt. He took another step closer. The closer he got, the more wrong it felt. The house seemed to close in around him, the wide corridors narrowing with each stride. The warmth he'd carried with him from the airport faded, replaced by a cool alertness. His breathing slowed, deliberate, as if his body was preparing him for something his mind refused to name. He passed another doorway and caught a glimpse of movement ahead, shadows shifting where they shouldn't be. His pulse quickened, though he kept his pace controlled. Whatever was happening, he needed to see it clearly, needed to understand before acting. The voice rose again, sharper now, words clipped and unforgiving. He caught fragments, complaints, accusations, irritation over something small and inconsequential, the kind of things that should never have mattered, not enough to justify that tone, not enough to explain the fear creeping into him. Fear, he realized with surprise, not for himself. He stopped just short of the living room, the space opening up ahead of him. From where he stood, he could see the edge of the furniture, the gleam of the floor, the sweep of the staircase beyond. He could also sense that one more step would change everything. His instincts screamed at him to stay where he was, to take in every detail before crossing that invisible line. Something was wrong, not dramatically wrong, not yet, but wrong in a way that made the air feel thinner, the silence more charged. This house was supposed to be a sanctuary. Whatever waited just beyond his line of sight did not belong there. He drew a quiet breath, steadying himself, unaware that the moment he was standing in, the uneasy stillness, the warning in his bones, was the last moment of calm he would have for a long time.
He took the last step into the living room and froze. The scene in front of him was impossible. His mother, frail and small against the room's grandeur, struggled to regain her balance. Her silver hair had come loose from its careful bun, one hand bracing against the arm of the sofa, the other gripping the edge of a chair that offered little support. Her glasses lay shattered on the floor, the lenses reflecting the morning light in sharp fragments. She looked smaller than he had ever seen her, diminished not by age alone, but by the fear pressing into her shoulders, curling her inward like a leaf in the wind. Above her, poised like a predator in a tableau that should have been unimaginable, stood his fiancée, perfectly dressed, hair immaculate, every inch the picture of sophistication. And yet, her eyes burned with something dark and deliberate. Her hand hovered near a vase as if to emphasize dominance. Her lips curled slightly, the edge of contempt unmistakable. Then, without hesitation, her foot lashed out against her mother's leg with a dull, horrifying thud. The sound reverberated through the room, small but undeniable. Margaret's soft cry seemed swallowed by the walls, her body curling instinctively to protect herself. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single instant, the delicate curve of her mother's spine bending away from harm, the sharp precision of cruelty in the woman he had trusted, and the cold certainty that nothing he had imagined would prepare him for this. His chest tightened. His first instinct screamed at him to move, to rush forward and act with white-hot fury, his hands clenched at his sides, his breath shallow, each inhale trembling with anger. But something in him stayed, rooted. Discipline honed over decades in boardrooms and courtrooms kept him still. He understood in that split second that this moment, witnessed fully, would define everything that came after. Any rash action now would risk more than it could save. He drew in another breath, forcing his awareness into the edges of the scene, absorbing the cruelty like a record being etched into memory. Vanessa, no, the woman standing over his mother, was a stranger in his house. Any illusion he had carried about love, partnership, trust, vanished as if consumed by the room itself. Everything he had imagined about their life together, the plans, the shared smiles, the future, collapsed under the weight of this act. His mother flinched again as Vanessa's foot hovered threateningly over her, impatience lacing every movement. She murmured words meant to placate, words barely audible above the tight cadence of the other's voice. Ethan's mind raced with everything he had been taught, everything he had promised himself. Protect, assess, control. And yet the sight of her there, helpless, defiant only in the instinctive attempt to shrink away, cut deeper than any business failure, any public loss he had ever endured. Something within him broke quietly, entirely, without a sound. Not with rage, not with noise, but with an understanding that the life he had known, the house he had built, the love he had trusted, had betrayed its own promise. The very walls, the floors, the air itself seemed complicit in allowing this. His mother's frailty, her sacrifice, her lifelong commitment to him, all of it reduced to a single, unprotected moment under the heel of someone he had believed would stand beside him. He fumbled for his phone with trembling fingers, his mind calculating, assessing, recording. He did not need to act yet. The proof would speak for itself. Vanessa continued, unaware, her words slicing through the space between them, sharper than any blow. Her arrogance, her confidence that she could command, intimidate, and dominate without consequence, hung in the room like a tangible presence. Margaret's gaze met his briefly, a flicker of recognition and relief, as if even in terror she had known he would see. Her lips pressed together to prevent a sound, her hands trembling as they sought support, not for herself, but for the illusion of composure. That instinct, the refusal to fully acknowledge her own pain in order to shield others, struck Ethan harder than the violence itself. He knelt instinctively beside her the moment the immediate threat passed. Every muscle in his body ached to protect her, to gather her into his arms and erase the terror she had endured. "Mom," he whispered, voice breaking where it hadn't since his childhood, a sound raw and unpracticed. His expensive suit, tailored to command boardrooms, now clung awkwardly against cold marble as he lowered himself beside her. She forced a soft smile, a flicker of warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm all right," she murmured, a lie offered to comfort him, to keep the moment from consuming them both. But the evidence was there, in the scattered papers, in the broken glasses, in the redness forming along her leg. Every detail confirmed it. The cruelty had been real, immediate, undeniable. For a long moment, Ethan simply remained there, absorbing the scene, cataloging the reality, feeling the illusion of his life collapse around him. Then he placed a careful arm beneath her shoulders, mindful that even a small misstep could deepen the hurt. The world outside the room seemed to fade. There was no boardroom, no negotiations, no wealth or power that could erase what had just happened. Only this, only her. He understood then, in the silence that followed, that the life he had imagined, trusting her, planning a future, sharing joy, was over. And yet, in that destruction, clarity bloomed. He would act, and he would act with purpose. Not rage, not chaos, but precision. Protection would come first. Everything else, everything that seemed urgent before could wait. Time had stopped, and in that frozen moment, so too had the illusions of love, safety, and home. All that remained was truth, and Ethan knew, finally, exactly what he had to do. Ethan's hands were trembling, though his body remained still. Every instinct in him screamed to move, to yell, to strike, to remove the danger physically and without thought. His chest felt like it would burst, each heartbeat hammering against the calm facade he had learned to wear in boardrooms, in negotiations, in moments that required control. But this was different. This was his mother, fragile and trembling, and the woman who had betrayed every trust he had ever placed in her. He did not move. Instead, he drew a slow, measured breath, feeling the tension ripple down to his toes. He forced his mind to catalog every detail: the broken glasses, the angle of the sofa, the faint bruise forming along her leg, the way her hands trembled as she clutched the armrest. He noticed Vanessa's posture, the calculated tilt of her head, the pride she carried even in the act of cruelty. Every flicker of expression, every syllable of her words was evidence, and he would not let it be lost. His eyes locked on his phone, still in his pocket. Slowly, deliberately, he drew it out, careful not to draw attention. He had learned long ago that patience in moments like this mattered more than immediate action. Rage would have consequences, uncontrolled, visible, irreversible consequences, but silent documentation, proof recorded without interference, was a weapon far stronger than any shout or slap could ever be. Vanessa's voice continued, sharp, clipped, cruel, punctuating the room with every word, unaware of the small, steady camera capturing it all. Her confidence, her arrogance, her sense of entitlement, each movement and phrase was imprinted, indelible. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his stance neutral, eyes fixed on the details, memorizing angles, spacing, cadence. This was not the time for confrontation. This was the time for truth. He knelt beside his mother, his expensive suit brushing against cold marble, and offered the smallest of reassurances, though words felt inadequate. "I've got you," he whispered softly. His mother's lips curved in the faintest acknowledgement, the kind that tried to mask fear and pride all at once. She had spent a lifetime shielding him from worry, sacrificing herself to smooth the edges of his existence. Now, in her own home, in the hands of someone she had trusted, she had been left exposed. Ethan studied her carefully, noting the subtle details that spoke louder than words. The way her shoulders were still slightly hunched, the faint redness along her knee, the quiet tension in her fingers. He placed the flowers he had brought on a nearby table, a silent promise of gentleness amid chaos. Nothing would be said yet. Nothing would be undone by impulsive action. The moment required restraint, and he would give it. Vanessa moved across the room, tidying papers, straightening cushions, maintaining the image of composure even after what had happened. She did not suspect she was being watched, and that realization only sharpened Ethan's resolve. There would be no immediate confrontation, no verbal fight fueled by anger. He understood that her manipulation thrived on chaos, on emotional reaction. He would deny her that power. Ethan's phone captured every angle, the tilt of the head, the flick of a hand, the unthinking cruelty that had marred the room. He reviewed it in his mind as he watched, noting the way the light caught on the broken glasses, the subtle sheen of unshed tears in his mother's eyes, the way the room's silence seemed heavier, pressing down with each measured step of the woman who had betrayed them both. He reminded himself again that restraint was strength. To act now would satisfy immediate fury, but could obscure evidence, could cloud judgment. To stay silent, to record, to gather the truth was to claim control. Rage without reason was useless. Precision, carefully executed, would ensure justice. After several long minutes, Vanessa finally left the room, confident and unaware of what had just been captured.
The hallway was empty now, the soft click of her heels fading. Ethan exhaled quietly, allowing a momentary release of tension, though the weight of what he had seen did not leave him. He knelt beside his mother again, helping her adjust to the sofa, wrapping the blanket she once loved around her thin shoulders. "Are you hurt?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Her faint nod was enough. She tried to smile, to minimize the moment as she always had, as if owning her own pain would only burden him. That instinct, selfless and protective, cut deeper than the attack itself. Ethan's chest tightened again, but he refused to let it show. Anger could wait. Strategy could not. He scanned the room once last time, taking mental notes of every detail, every object, every evidence point that could corroborate what had happened. The weight of his mother's vulnerability pressed into him, anchoring his decision. He would not allow impulse to guide him. He would not allow love or loyalty to blind him. Every step, every movement, every choice from this moment forward would be calculated, precise, and unwavering. Ethan rose slowly, gathering his composure. The flowers on the table seemed to anchor him to the reality he wanted to create, one where protection and clarity mattered more than anger or immediate retribution. Rage was present, white-hot beneath the surface, but it was contained, refined into something sharper than any immediate action could ever be. For the first time in that room, he felt a quiet certainty. The illusion of safety was gone, but the path forward was clear. He would protect his mother, he would expose the truth, he would act with a precision born from restraint, not impulse. And when the time came, no one, no power, no manipulation, no false smile would stand in his way. The moment of chaos had passed, but its imprint remained. Ethan Blackwood's life, his home, and the life of the woman who had given him everything were forever changed, and he would make sure that nothing like this ever happened again.
Ethan's hands still trembled slightly as he adjusted the blanket around his mother's thin shoulders, but he forced himself to breathe evenly, to stay present. Margaret's small frame shivered beneath the weight of more than just the morning chill. She looked up at him, eyes wide but soft, refusing to fully meet his. Her lips pressed into a faint line, a small attempt at composure that betrayed everything she felt inside. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice barely audible over that emptiness of the room. "I shouldn't have gotten in her way. I shouldn't have—" She trailed off, and the words hung, incomplete, as if saying them aloud could somehow lessen the shame she carried in silence. Ethan's chest tightened further, a dull ache spreading from his shoulders down into his stomach. "Mom," his voice was steady but soft, trying to match the quietness of her tone. "You didn't do anything wrong." Her hands shook as she adjusted her position, tucking herself slightly further into the sofa, curling inward in the small space she allowed herself. I shouldn't have made a fuss. I know she's strong, and Her voice wavered, breaking at the edges. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Ethan knelt beside her again, careful not to overwhelm her with proximity, though every instinct in him wanted to shield her from the world entirely. He studied her face, tracing the fine lines of age and worry, the faint redness along her cheeks, the ghost of a bruise forming just above her knee. She had spent her life giving everything to him, her energy, her time, her comfort, and now, in her own home, she had been left exposed. "You were protecting yourself," he said quietly, "and that's okay. You've done more than anyone could ask." He kept his tone calm, grounding, trying to anchor her in a space where guilt could dissolve into reality. But the truth was sharp and raw, slicing into him too. He had been absent. He hadn't been there to prevent this. Margaret looked away, pressing a trembling hand to her lips. I always tried to keep things from you, to make your life easier. I never wanted to be a burden. I thought I could manage, and now I failed." Her voice cracked with the weight of decades spent minimizing her own needs for the sake of others. Ethan's throat tightened. He had never seen her like this, not vulnerable in the way that left her self-critical, not exposed in a way that seemed to punish her for living. Every word she spoke pressed down on him like a stone. Guilt, deep and unrelenting, rose up, threatening to drown the calm he had fought to maintain. "You did nothing wrong," he said again, firmer this time. "You survived today. You protected yourself the best way you could. That's not failure." He reached out, lightly touching her hand to guide it from her face, letting her feel the steady presence beside her. "I should have been here." She shook her head slowly, faintly, a gesture that both acknowledged her failure and tried to shield him from his own. "No, Ethan, you couldn't have known. I didn't want to worry you. I thought I could handle it." Her eyes glistened with the unshed tears she refused to let fall. The effort to protect him even now, to spare him from the weight of her fear, was as instinctive as it was heartbreaking. Ethan swallowed hard. The guilt that had been simmering beneath the surface all morning now surged fully, not at her, not at the event itself, but at himself, for trusting, for being absent, for imagining safety could be purchased and assumed. He had believed that love and wealth were shields against harm, and the reality, sharp and undeniable, tore that illusion apart. He tightened the blanket around her again, pressing lightly, silently, as if the physical presence of protection could somehow stitch together the fractures of the morning. She leaned into the motion just slightly, not fully, still trying to diminish her own pain, still trying to shrink herself from the world's cruelty. I sold my home so you could pursue your dreams," she whispered, almost to herself, almost inaudible. "I never wanted to be in the way. I never wanted to be weak." Her words were meant to soothe, but they struck him deeper than Vanessa's heel had. Her lifelong sacrifice, her enduring quiet shame, had always been hidden, tucked behind smiles, behind discipline, behind love that put her child first. Ethan pressed a hand gently against her cheek, tilting her head so that she met his eyes. "Mom, listen to me," he said softly. "You are not weak. You are the strongest person I know, and anyone who would hurt you doesn't deserve a place in our lives." He let the words sink in, letting the power of his restraint speak louder than any immediate anger ever could. Margaret nodded slowly, still hesitant, still minimizing, still unsure if she could accept that she was no longer alone. Ethan felt the weight of her quiet suffering, the decades of selflessness and hidden guilt, and he promised himself silently that he would never allow it to go unacknowledged again. The room remained still around them, heavy with the morning's shadow, yet something had shifted. Not everything was healed, and the pain of what had happened still lingered in every subtle tremor of her hands, every line of her shoulders. But for the first time, she allowed herself to rest against the reality that someone else was willing to carry the burden with her, not to replace it, but to protect it. Ethan remained kneeling beside her, silent, present, letting the quiet gravity of the moment speak. Rage had been held in check, impulse had been resisted, and yet the emotional truth of the morning, the guilt, the shame, the betrayal, was now fully visible, fully recognized, and in that recognition, fully actionable. For Margaret, the weight of her quiet shame began to lift just slightly, cushioned by the knowledge that her son had seen, had understood, and had chosen to stay. For Ethan, the pain of absence transformed into purpose. Every moment of hesitation, every suppressed instinct, every careful breath had led him here, and he knew with certainty that what came next would not be fueled by guilt or emotion, but by clarity, resolve, and the unyielding decision to protect the one person who had always protected him. Ethan stood in the quiet of the living room, his mother seated on the sofa, wrapped in the blanket he had draped around her shoulders. The sunlight filtered through the tall windows, falling across the marble floors and highlighting the faint remnants of chaos. The broken glasses, the scattered papers, the faint bruise forming along Margaret's leg. Everything in the room whispered a single truth. Nothing would ever be the same. He had imagined this morning countless times, the unannounced return, the surprised smiles, the warmth of home. He had imagined holding his mother's hand, feeling the gentle strength she always exuded, and laughing with his fiancée as if the world were theirs alone. That version of love, that version of life, had vanished the moment he stepped into the room and witnessed the heel coming down.
He closed his eyes briefly, letting the weight of that reality settle fully. Love could not justify cruelty. Wealth could not shield someone from abuse. No amount of planning, no carefully constructed future could erase the damage inflicted in that instant. And yet, for years, he had measured success and affection by the presence of those illusions: comfort, status, appearances. Now, each of those measurements felt hollow. He turned to look at Margaret, her hands still trembling slightly as she clutched the edge of the blanket. Her gaze followed his, hesitant, as if searching for the words that would make everything all right again. But there were no words to undo what had happened. There was only action, deliberate and unflinching. Ethan felt the pull of anger rise, hot and consuming, but he suppressed it. He did not want revenge. He did not want theatrics. Rage would not restore her sense of safety, and it would not erase the fact that someone he had trusted had crossed every line. Instead, he allowed the anger to crystallize into clarity. The decision formed quietly but unmistakably in his mind: protection over love, duty over desire, safety over comfort. This was the line, drawn sharply and without hesitation. Anyone who could harm the woman who had given him everything, anyone capable of cruelty in the sanctuary of his home, had no place in his life, no matter how much he had hoped otherwise. He remembered the years his mother had sacrificed for him, the nights she went hungry so he could eat, the hours spent correcting mistakes he hadn't even realized he made, the quiet discipline that built him into the man he was. She had raised him to stand for what was right, to recognize injustice even when it came from those closest to him. And in that moment, he realized he was honoring her teachings not through fury, but through restraint, through calculated action that would secure her safety forever. His phone lay on the nearby table, a silent instrument of truth. He had captured every detail, every word, every movement of the morning's events. The evidence was not for vengeance, it was for justice. He would ensure that nothing of this sort could ever happen again. He would act decisively, but not impulsively. Ethan's gaze returned to Margaret. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice firm yet gentle, "this isn't about anger. It's about making sure nothing like this ever happens again. I won't let anyone hurt you. Not now, not ever." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, the faintest hint of relief breaking through the lingering fear. The weight of his decision was absolute. Love, the kind he had felt for his fiancée, could not excuse betrayal. Sentiment could not excuse violence. The moral line was clear, and he would not cross it. Anyone who stood on the wrong side of it would face the consequences, and anyone who remained on the right side would know that safety and respect were non-negotiable. Ethan straightened, letting the tension drain from his shoulders in measured breaths. The house no longer felt neutral or uncertain. It felt like a space waiting for him to claim control, to restore order and protection. He would begin by removing the threat from their lives. That was the first step, necessary and unavoidable. Beyond that, he would rebuild the home, the life, and the boundaries that ensured no harm could reach them again. He moved slowly through the room, surveying the subtle evidence of violation that still lingered: broken items, displaced furniture, shadows cast awkwardly across the floor. Each small detail reinforced his resolve. Nothing could undo the morning, but he could prevent it from repeating, prevent it from ever touching them again. In the quiet, Ethan understood that true strength was not shown in dramatic gestures, nor in loud declarations. It was shown in choices, the willingness to stand for what was right, even when it meant giving up comfort, even when it meant choosing protection over personal desire. He had loved once. He would not allow that love to endanger the person he owed his life to. The decision was made, fully and irrevocably. Vanessa Moore, the woman he had thought would be his partner, could no longer occupy any space in their lives. and as the sun rose higher through the tall windows, bathing the room in light, Ethan felt the clarity of purpose settle over him. He would act with precision, with calm, with authority. Protection over love, justice over impulse, safety over illusion. He had drawn the line, and nothing would cross it.
Ethan entered the dining room with slow, deliberate steps. The morning sunlight from the living room spilled across the marble floor, catching on the edges of the large oak table where his lawyer sat waiting, a briefcase open and papers neatly organized. The household staff lingered against the walls, their faces tense, eyes flicking toward him with quiet uncertainty. The air felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath, bracing for the moment that was about to come. Vanessa arrived last, as expected. She stepped through the doors with confidence, elegance radiating from every perfectly arranged detail. Hair, heels, dress. She smiled, the kind of smile meant to charm, to disarm, to command attention, and it landed in the room like a challenge. Her eyes swept the scene, lingering on Ethan, the lawyer, the staff, as if she were already calculating the outcome in her favor. "Is this some kind of surprise?" she asked, lightly, the words edged with curiosity, but beneath them a faint undercurrent of unease that she refused to acknowledge. Ethan did not answer immediately. He stood, tall, shoulders squared, exuding a calm authority that left no space for negotiation. His hand moved to the table, retrieving the phone that had recorded every crucial moment of the morning. With a single tap, the device connected to the large screen behind the table. The first image flickered to life. Vanessa's sharp words filled the room, her voice ringing out clearly, every syllable now unshielded from scrutiny. Then came the movement, the raise of her heel, the strike against Margaret's leg, the shock in his mother's posture. The camera had captured it all, the tension, the cruelty, the control she wielded over someone incapable of defending herself. Gasps rose from the staff. One of the household employees covered their mouth, wide-eyed. Vanessa's parents, seated beside her, leaned forward, faces draining of color, disbelief etched across their features. The evidence was undeniable, irrefutable. "This isn't what it looks like," Vanessa said quickly, stepping forward, her voice pitched with feigned innocence, the edge of desperation creeping in. She raised a hand, a half-hearted attempt to interrupt, to redirect, to salvage control. Ethan raised a hand, stopping her, without touch, without hesitation. The room seemed to hold still. The staff, the lawyer, even Vanessa herself waited. The video continued, replaying her actions in full clarity, words and movement intertwined, painting a portrait of dominance disguised as civility, cruelty hidden behind elegance. When the footage ended, silence fell like a verdict, heavy, certain, irrevocable. Vanessa's confidence faltered, her practiced smile cracking as she realized the room no longer bent to her will. "You can't be serious," she said, voice tight now, trembling as the tension began to squeeze the air from her lungs. "After everything we planned, after all the arrangements." "The engagement is over," Ethan said evenly, his tone cold, precise, unwavering. "There will be no wedding, no future, no place for anyone who harms my mother in my life." Her eyes widened, searching his face for a reaction she recognized, some spark of emotion she could manipulate. But all she found was calm, absolute, controlled, undeniable calm. I was angry. It won't happen again," she stammered, reaching toward him, a futile attempt at reclamation. Her parents leaned in, whispering, but Ethan ignored them. "You have 1 hour to gather your belongings. Security will escort you out. No further discussion." The words landed heavier than any shout could have, final and inassailable. Vanessa froze, her body rigid, the laughter she often used to command authority gone, replaced by panic. The lawyer stepped forward, sliding a folder across the table.
Everything in this house belongs to Mr. Blackwood. Miss Moore has no legal claim to any assets or property. Her parents attempted to speak again, but Ethan's calm, silent authority left no room for interference. Every member of the room understood that control had shifted, and it belonged entirely to him. Vanessa's sobs echoed down the hall as security led her away. Each step of her heels striking the floor sounded like the final punctuation of the morning, and still Ethan did not flinch. There was no satisfaction in the act, no gloating, only the firm, cold realization that justice had been done, that truth had prevailed. The staff exhaled collectively, the tension in their shoulders easing. His mother remained seated, wrapped in the blanket, eyes wide but safe, her fragile hand resting in his. Ethan knelt beside her briefly, ensuring she was steady, letting her feel the calm and certainty of the moment. The house, once heavy with unease, seemed to release a breath of its own. Light poured in unfiltered, the echoes of confrontation fading into a tangible sense of restored order. Ethan understood, fully, that true authority had not been asserted through anger or force or spectacle, but through restraint, truth, and the courage to act decisively when it mattered most. Outside, the world continued unawares, but inside, the moral line had been drawn, clear and uncompromising. Anyone who threatened those he loved would face consequences, and anyone who remained would know the measure of safety and respect that defined his life. For Ethan, the climax of the morning was not about humiliation or victory, it was about clarity, protection, justice. He rose, straightened his jacket, and looked at his mother. Margaret's hand squeezed his gently, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and quiet pride. No words were necessary. The reckoning had been delivered. The wrong had been addressed, and in that stillness, Ethan Blackwood understood the true weight of power and the meaning of using it correctly.
Ethan walked through the mansion with deliberate calm, every step measured, every glance precise. The morning's chaos had faded, leaving a quiet that felt almost sacred. The evidence had done its work. Vanessa had been removed, her sobs and protests echoing briefly down the hall before disappearing entirely. But the work was far from over. Protection was not momentary, it was enduring. That was what he intended to ensure. He met with his lawyer again, sitting at the same oak dining table where the confrontation had occurred. The documents on the table were meticulous: legal filings, restraining orders, transfers of property, formal declarations of ownership. Ethan reviewed each page carefully, knowing that the permanence of these actions was what would truly safeguard his mother's life. Every line, every signature was a shield against anyone who might attempt to return chaos to their home. "Once these are signed," he said, his voice quiet but authoritative, "Vanessa will have no legal claim, no access, no ability to interfere in our lives. Everything is final." The lawyer nodded, sliding a pen across the folder. "All paperwork has been prepared with precision. Your mother's safety and your legal authority over the property are fully ensured. There is nothing she can contest." Ethan signed each document with steady hands, aware of the weight of every stroke. He didn't feel satisfaction nor triumph, only the clarity that came from decisive action. True power was not in displays of anger or dominance. It was in ensuring that justice could not be undone, that protection was permanent, and that harm could never touch the ones you loved again. Security protocols were reviewed next. Ethan instructed the staff to remain vigilant, to monitor entrances and exits, and to ensure that Margaret would never again be placed in harm's way within her own home. Surveillance systems were upgraded, routines adjusted, and every corner of the mansion was evaluated with precision. Safety, he realized, was not a state, it was a constant practice. Margaret watched quietly from the sofa, her hands clasped around a warm cup of tea, the tension in her frame slowly easing. Ethan sat beside her, not out of obligation, but to provide the presence she could now feel was steady and unwavering. "It's done," he said softly, letting the words settle between them.
It's ours to protect, forever. Her eyes filled slightly, the faintest glimmer of relief breaking through the remnants of fear and lingering guilt. "You've truly protected me," she whispered, her voice trembling but proud. "I don't have to worry anymore. You've taken care of everything." Ethan reached out and lightly pressed his hand to hers, letting the warmth of contact convey what words could not. "It's my responsibility," he said, "not just as your son, but as someone who refuses to let harm touch those who have given everything for me." The mansion, once a stage for tension and cruelty, now felt lighter. Each room had been examined, each potential risk accounted for. Furniture with sharp edges had been replaced with soft, rounded pieces, slippery floors replaced with warm wood that would support unsteady steps. The space was being redesigned not for appearances, but for safety, for comfort, for the life of the woman who had spent decades sacrificing for him. Ethan walked through the halls slowly, checking each doorway, each window, each line of sight. Nothing was left to chance. He understood now that power without action was meaningless, wealth without protection was hollow. Authority, he realized, was not demonstrated in confrontation, but in ensuring that the consequences of one's choices were enduring and absolute. Margaret rose from the sofa and followed him quietly, letting him lead the way as he inspected each change, each precaution. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace in her own home, a freedom from fear that had been absent for far too long. She could breathe without hesitation, move without anxiety, and live without uncertainty. By the end of the day, the legal filings were complete, the restraining orders formally enacted, and Vanessa's access permanently severed. Security measures had been implemented, and the mansion itself had been transformed into a sanctuary rather than a place of anxiety. Ethan acted decisively, calmly, and with precision, the power at his disposal used not for dominance, but for protection. Sitting beside his mother later that evening, he watched her relax into the sofa cushions, her hands finally still, her eyes reflecting the quiet strength that had always lived within her. The house no longer held tension, it hummed with warmth, sunlight spilling into every corner. Ethan understood then that true power was invisible, present in preparation, in careful action, in unwavering resolve. He didn't feel triumphant nor vindicated, he felt steady, aligned with his values, and certain that harm would never reach them again. The engagement had ended, justice had been delivered, and his mother's safety was ensured. That was all that mattered. The rest, the wealth, the status, the plans that had once defined him, were now secondary to the clarity of purpose he had finally achieved. Ethan remained in the room with Margaret, watching the sunset spill gold across the newly softened floors. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of responsibility and the quiet satisfaction of knowing it had been executed perfectly. Power, he realized, was nothing without its proper use, and now, finally, he had used it correctly.
The mansion felt different now, though the walls were the same. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, warm and unfiltered, touching the soft wood floors that had replaced the cold marble. The sharp corners of furniture had disappeared, replaced by gentle curves and padded edges, creating a space that spoke of safety rather than status. Flowers rested in every corner, and the faint strains of classical music drifted through the halls, the melodies Margaret loved, chosen for her comfort rather than decoration. The house had transformed, not by wealth or design, but by intent, protection, care, and thoughtful presence. Ethan moved quietly through the living room, surveying the changes with a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with purpose. His mother sat in her favorite chair by the window, wrapped in a soft blanket, a cup of tea warming her hands. She looked out at the garden, the early afternoon sunlight highlighting the silver strands in her hair, her expression serene for the first time in years. "Ethan," she said softly, turning to meet his gaze, "you didn't just defend me, you chose me." He knelt beside her chair, placing a steady hand over hers. "I always will. Nothing will ever change that. Safety, respect, love, they're not optional. anyone who can't uphold that doesn't belong in our lives." Margaret smiled faintly, the tension in her shoulders easing as she leaned back. I never thought I'd feel safe again in my own home," she murmured, a quiet wonder in her voice. "But I do, because of you." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with relief or satisfaction. It was clarity, the kind that comes when wrongs are righted, when boundaries are enforced, and when the people you love are protected without compromise. Over the past few weeks, he had stayed home before sunset, prepared meals with her, listened to stories he had missed during long absences, and rebuilt a bond that was stronger than fear. The home no longer echoed with tension, it resonated with presence and genuine care. He remembered the early mornings, the unannounced return, the moment Vanessa's heel struck his mother, the silence that had followed, and the calm decisiveness that had defined his actions since. That clarity had not only removed a threat, it had redefined the way he understood strength. True power, he realized, was not measured by wealth, influence, or the ability to intimidate. It was measured by restraint, moral courage, and the willingness to act decisively to protect what mattered most. Ethan sat across from Margaret at the dining table that evening, 2 steaming mugs of tea before them. He listened as she recounted stories from his childhood, moments of joy, small triumphs, quiet lessons of patience and integrity. He had been too busy to hear them before, but now each word felt precious, a reminder of the woman who had built him into the man he had become. "I've seen a lot in my life, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But what you've done these past weeks, it's something different. You didn't just react, you thought, you protected, you chose the right path even when it was hard." Ethan nodded. "I realized that protecting someone you love sometimes means making hard choices. It isn't about anger or punishment, it's about creating a life where harm can't reach them, no matter what." The mansion hummed with quiet comfort, each room a reflection of that philosophy. He had canceled overseas trips that once kept him away, delegated responsibilities rather than abandoning presence, and allowed himself to slow down enough to truly live with his mother. The transformation was not only in the house, but within him. He had learned that clarity, action, and moral courage mattered far more than wealth, appearances, or the illusions of control. Evenings became simple, quiet affairs. Tea by the window, conversations filled with laughter or the tremble of remembered pain, moments of reflection and gentle guidance. Ethan's relationship with his mother had healed, deeper than it had ever been before. Her quiet strength, once taken for granted, was now acknowledged daily, honored in the design of their home and the rhythm of their lives. As he watched her settle into her chair, hands wrapped around the warm cup, he understood the final lesson. The measure of success was never in fortune, power, or societal approval. It was in the courage to draw boundaries, to act decisively for the protection of those you love, and to cultivate an environment where they could thrive without fear. Strength was defined not by what he could take, but what he could safeguard. Ethan leaned back, a calm smile touching his lips. The mansion, the home, and his life had been reshaped by choice, by love, and by unwavering moral resolve. Outside, the sunlight shifted, painting the rooms in hues of gold. Inside, the quiet presence of safety and trust settled over them like a promise fulfilled. He met his mother's eyes once more. "This is the life we deserve," he said softly, "a life defined by care, by respect, by strength used wisely." Margaret nodded, a serene smile lighting her face. "And now we have it." In the silence that followed, Ethan knew he had finally understood what it meant to be truly strong. Not loud, not vengeful, not feared, but resolute, protective, and unwavering. True strength was quiet, deliberate, and compassionate, and it was his to wield every day.